In today's episode, we'll look at the recent New York Times list of best movies released since the year 2000. The rankings were calculated from polls given to industry insiders, which appeared to be mostly actors and directors. It came out a few months back, and like all lists of this type, led to its fair share of hot takes, controversies, and discussion. I'll let you know what I thought of the list overall at the end of the episode, but first, we'll examine some of my takeaways. When discussing these movies, I'm going to focus on what I have seen. After seeing Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon for the first time last week, I'm up to 61 movies from this list that I've seen. Possibly 62. I may or may not have seen The Prophet. A few of the movies I haven't seen are on my Canopy watch list, but most are movies I had either not heard of before, The Gleaners and I, In the Mood for Love, or really have no desire to see based on what I know about the movie. Black Panther, Roma. Obviously, the number of these movies that I've seen will go up over time, but want to let you know that I'm not a completionist. Like all art, my take on these movies is subjective, and movies that meant a lot to you may or may not have meant a lot to me, and vice versa. C'est la vie. Quick note, along with the original New York Times list, there was a separate vote held by the readers of the paper. This list is slightly different. I'll refer to it a few times in this essay. I've seen 68 of the movies from that list. When I say the readers list, this is what I'm referring to. Let's dive into it. Takeaway number one, the creators of this list really love them some auteurs. A number of filmmakers had multiple films on the list. Just so you know, an auteur is anyone who writes and directs their own film. Christopher Nolan, who I assume is hard at work at coming up with ways to cut Penelope out of his Odyssey movie, leads all directors on the list with 5 movies. I would, in order to make a fairer and more equitable list, and, if I may be so bold, make room for better movies, limit him to 3. I think Nolan is unquestionably the best filmmaker of the last 25 years, if you gauge filmmaking as the ability to create stories that speak to a broad audience without reaching for the lowest common denominator. I don't begrudge him having the most films, but I would take a couple of them away because A, I need the spots for later, and B, Interstellar and Oppenheimer are overrated. Oppenheimer went from being heralded as the greatest film of the 21st century just 2 years ago to being ranked 65th, just beating out Spotlight, a well-made but bland procedural. As a boy child, every time I heard one of Matthew McConaughey's pained "Murphs," I shed a silent tear for Casey Affleck. To save time, I'll briefly go through the other movies I would take from any director with more than 2 movies. Again, only focused on movies that I've seen. I'm taking Inside Llewyn Davis and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I'm taking Phantom Thread and Punch Drunk Love. I'm taking Inglourious Bastards and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Off. Takeaway number 2. If you're going to hand out 6 awards to A24, why these movies? I'm really happy that Lady Bird made the list. I thought it was one of the best coming-of-age movies during this time period. It does what seems like a really difficult thing to do, makes all the characters in this family feel fallible, yet believable and real. Their struggles felt like the struggles of many families. Moonlight is in the canon. While I don't love the movie, it's solid from a technical perspective and won Best Picture. I have a feeling that it's going to be on lists like this for a long, long time. I also think it would have been irresponsible to leave off Everything Everywhere All at Once, given how much support that movie had. Like Moonlight, I think its win of Best Picture means it's going to be around for a while, though I am heartened to see it so low on this list. My fingers are crossed that it will soon slip off. The other A24 movies, Past Lives, After Sun, and Under the Skin, should all not be on this list. Hereditary, which made the reader list, but not this one, 8th Grade, and The Witch all should have taken these spots. Takeaway number 3. If you're going to hand out 3 awards to Pixar, why these movies? The Incredibles, Finding Nemo, and Inside Out should replace the 3 movies Up, WALL-E, and Ratatouille from Pixar on this list. I don't have much to add because I don't want the podcast to run long, but the picks here are indicative of a trend I'll talk about at the end of the episode. Takeaway number 4. Which movie didn't make the list that I was thrilled to see left off? I talked about The Shape of Water in my Oscars countdown episode. Out of everything that did not make the list, I was happiest that this was left off. I didn't know how representative this movie will be for the future canon. More on that later. But it getting left off was almost reward enough for things that I loved not being included. Almost. I think in some ways Parasite, which came a few years after, became the social issue movie on this list, and the voters felt that Guillermo del Toro was properly acknowledged with Pan's Labyrinth and did not see a need to reward him again. I was also happy not to see Ryan Gosling, no Barbie, Blade Runner 2049, Drive, or La La Land. I've only seen the last 3 and felt they were bizarrely overrated. While I really enjoyed The Nice Guys, this enjoyment was balanced out by The Place Beyond the Pines, one of my least favorite movies of the last 25 years. I was also thrilled not to see Coda, Nomadland, and Nope. Takeaway number 5. What was I surprised didn't make the cut? For as much critical hype as The Banshees of Inisherin received when it came out, I was surprised that it didn't make the cut on this list. I was also surprised not to see Avatar, given its huge amount of commercial success and how much that movie changed the movie experience going forward, leading to 3D films for a few years. Given the relatively few horror movies, I think The Babadook was also a movie that could have, and should have, in my opinion, made this list. You could also have included The Substance, both of which were directed by women. Moulin Rouge and Baz Luhrmann are not on the list. That also seemed odd given how huge that movie was culturally at the time and how much of a commercial success Elvis was years later. I'm also a bit surprised that Mystic River didn't make the cut given how prolific Clint Eastwood has been in these 25 years. I think it's his best film of the period and overall a strong, if depressing, movie. Given that he also directed a Best Picture winner in Million Dollar Baby, I was surprised he wasn't here. I was slightly surprised, though not bothered by it, to see that Anora didn't make the list. Maybe recency bias or a growing realization that the movie shouldn't have rolled the Oscars is slowly sinking in. Takeaway number 6. Is it time for us to talk about Bridesmaids? This is the worst pick on this list. Bridesmaids comes in at number 32 out of 100. If Borat, which is up at 53, and Bridesmaids had switched places, no one would have cared, but if you're going to put together a list of the best films of the 21st century, and Bridesmaids is beating out Lord of the Rings, Gone Girl, and Black Swan, there's a problem. I'll talk about it more below. I think the list does a good job of being balanced by genre, and while there are some genre exclusions, westerns, musicals, war, romantic comedies, and horror, for the most part, it gets things right. Here, not so much. I like Bridesmaids. I think the movie is very funny. It was less funny on a second viewing, but that is par for the course with comedies. That being said, here is a brief list of comedies that are funnier than Bridesmaids that, while they would have all been seen as nuts, given the high placing on this list, are still better than Bridesmaids and more deserving of this spot. Wet Hot American Summer, Old School, The Hangover, Black Dynamite, This Is the End, Mean Girls, I Love You Man. Before the second half of the show, a word from our sponsor. Do you enjoy reading but can't find book reviewers you connect with? Do you find booktubers more concerned with showing off their book hauls than reading to be as useful as solar-powered flashlights? You may enjoy Another Book Review. It's a spoiler-free book review channel where I review everything from contemporary literature to classics, genre fiction such as sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, as well as a large dose of nonfiction. If you loved reading as a kid but fell out of the habit and are looking to jump back in, or if you never left in the first place, you'll find something to enjoy. That's Another Book Review on youtube.com. Takeaway number 7, Pleasant Surprises. City of God, Children of Men, Michael Clayton. City of God made nearly no money when it came out. I would not have seen it had I not worked in a movie theater at the time, so I was thrilled to see it on this list. Children of Men seems incredibly prescient and has one of the tensest moments I've ever had in a movie. Michael Clayton is a movie that seems to have gotten a lot of reappraisal since its release. I think it's the best depiction of pressures put on people in the professional managerial class. While it's not everyone's cup of tea, I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. Finally, Best in Show. Super happy to see this on the list. Some prefer A Mighty Wind, but having seen this movie a few times over the years, I still think it holds up really well, especially Fred Willard's announcer, who I now view as the template for every other obnoxious sportscaster, both in film and in real life. Parker Posey as a Starbucks drinking yuppie is aces. I don't think many people would have complained if it had been left off, but I've always had a soft spot in my heart for this goofy masterpiece. Takeaway number 8, The Swappies. Welcome to what I'm calling the Swappies. These are the movies that are related in some way, either genre, director, or Best Picture winner, that, in my opinion, would have made the list better if they had been switched or replaced by other movies. Traffic is a better movie than Ocean's 11. Zero Dark 30 is better than The Hurt Locker. I would have swapped out Minority Report for Edge of Tomorrow. I also think that Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams 2009 film, is underrated and also could have taken this spot or even the spot held by Arrival, which I think Villeneuve received because people were turned off by Prisoners, though Sicario and Enemy also have fans. Though Dune, both parts made the reader's list. I thought the first J.J. Abrams directed Star Trek was one of the best theater experiences in the last 25 years that I've had, and had he stopped there, maybe he would have gotten a spot on the list, but I think the disaster that was the Star Wars trilogy and the mediocrity of Super 8 probably hurt his chances. Isle of Dogs and Life Aquatic would be my two Wes Anderson picks. I don't know where it comes from, but there seems to be a resurgence as to the importance and quality of the film Moneyball, which I remember as being, in a word, competent. If you needed a sports movie on this list, did you? Did you really need a sports movie on this list? May I suggest The Fighter, the Christian Bale, Mark Wahlberg boxing film that came out the same year as The Social Network, Black Swan, and the ultimate Best Picture winner, The King's Speech, which seems to have been strangely memory hold. My guess is that the batch of movies that surrounded it were so strong that it oftentimes gets forgotten in the mix. I've never seen The Florida Project, so I can't speak to its quality directly, but was a little bummed that Red Rocket, which is not a perfect film, but one I thought a lot about after watching it, didn't get a spot on the list. I'm swapping out 12 Years a Slave and The Departed. I'm replacing them with The Artist and Crash. Unless I can think of a better doc, I would swap out Grizzly Man for Who Killed the Electric Car, Jodorowsky's Dune, or Downloaded, the documentary about the rise and fall of Napster and its effect on pop culture. I haven't seen the other two docs, The Act of Killing or The Gleaners and I, on the list, and those are the swappies. Takeaway number 9, what got left off? This is always the most controversial part of any list. If you didn't say, but they left off blank, what are you even doing here? My picks would be Manchester by the Sea, Sexy Beast, 8th Grade, and Traffic. These all should have made this list. Top Gun Maverick, which made the reader's list, should have also made the list. It would have been a stretch given that it lost a lot of money, but I also thought Chazelle's Babylon could have gotten a spot. I thought Master and Commander was incredibly ambitious and also should have been on the list. Blue Ruin, Narc, and Out of the Furnace are three other movies that are lesser seen, but I've thought a lot about over the years that should have been considered, even if they were admittedly long shots. Triplets of Belleville is a weird French animated movie that few people have seen. I would not place it in the Spirited Away slot, but it also should have a spot on this list. I'll call out a few missed opportunities in the last section of this essay. Takeaway number 10. Who is the biggest loser from this list? The biggest loser from this list, and the person who has the most gripe with the list based on their accomplishments, is, in my opinion, Mel Gibson. I'd argue that the A tier of directors are all taken care of. Almost everyone that you can think of outside of maybe George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola, neither of whom have done their best work in the last 25 years, have at least one movie on the list. Underneath them, of those not on the list, for what I'd call the B+ tier, we have Gibson, Eastwood, who I mentioned above, M. Night Shyamalan, and Danny Boyle. Shyamalan's Unbreakable is a movie that some, Tarantino for example, love, but hasn't received much in terms of critical reevaluation writ large. His two best movies of this period, Signs and The Village, have fans, but I doubt many votes for this list. Like Abrams above, his checkered record after his breakout hit probably hurt his stature a bit. I'd argue that in the 2000s, Danny Boyle's high point is Slumdog Millionaire, which did win Best Picture. While the movie still has some defenders, I don't think it's a film that has risen in acclaim over the years, with some critics accusing it of poverty porn and having a neo-imperialist gaze. I've never seen 127 Hours or his Steve Jobs movie, but they're both movies that, while having some fans, haven't amassed a critical following and weren't impactful beyond their release in any measurable way. What is my argument for Mel Gibson? The Passion of the Christ, whatever your feelings on it or its director, started a wave of faith-based cinema that has proven extremely durable over the last 25 years, with Sound of Freedom, for instance, making close to 20 times its budget at the international box office a couple of years ago. If we are measuring great based on impact, this alone makes the movie deserving. If you also considered the dearth of war movies on this list, The Hurt Locker is really the only thing we have from that genre. The exclusion of Hacksaw Ridge, possibly the best war movie in the last 25 years, is striking. Finally, Apocalyptico is a great pure action adventure movie. It's not based on any pre-existing IP, and while it received some praise by fellow directors around the time of its release, has also seemed to have diminished in stature over time, though I don't know why. Do I think Mel Gibson is not on the list due to his politics and past statements? I'm sure they didn't help. I'll leave it there. Regardless of his past statements, I think there should be at least one spot on this list for Braveheart. The only other director I can think of that I felt probably could have gotten another one or possibly 2 or 3 movies on this list was Darren Aronofsky. Other than Black Swan, he directed The Wrestler, Mother, and Requiem for a Dream, all 3 of which were either critically lauded or have had strong influence on the visual styles of other filmmakers. But because he has a film on this list, I don't think he got robbed in quite the same way as Mel. Takeaway number 11, and now for the New York Times Top 10 list. Number 10, The Social Network. Number 9, Spirited Away. Number 8, Get Out. Number 7, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Number 6, No Country for Old Men. Number 5, Moonlight. Number 4, In the Mood for Love. Number 3, There Will Be Blood. number 2, Mulholland Drive, and number 1, Parasite. Takeaway number 12, and now for my top 10. I made this more on instinct than any kind of careful calculation, but here are my top 10 from this period from 2000 to 2025. Number 10, The Incredibles. Number 9, Inception. Number 8, Eighth Grade. Number 7, Michael Clayton. Number 6, Gladiator. Number 5, Sexy Beast. Number 4, Manchester by the Sea. Number 3, Parasite. Number 2, The Social Network. And number 1, No Country for Old Men. So there is some overlap between the two lists. The only movie on the New York Times list in the top 10 that I have not seen is In the Mood for Love, which I had not heard of until the release of this list. From what I gather, it is less well known, at least in the States, than something like Cinema Paradiso or Run, Lola Run, or released more recently, City of God or Amelie, both of which made this list. I may or may not watch it someday. As for the rest of the list, Spirited Away is a movie that I know that I have seen. I would have watched it either my freshman or sophomore years in college. I have not seen it since. At my local theater, they often re-release classic movies, especially if they have been remastered. There was a trailer for this movie. I have no recollection about anything from this movie. If I liked it or I didn't like it, hated it, or loved it, nothing. I watched Kiki's Delivery Service a few years back and loved it, and tried to watch Princess Mononoke a few times but couldn't get past the first 15 minutes. Suffice it to say, I think if we're going to leave it on the list, it needs to be a lot lower than the top 10. I hear The Wind Rises is also fantastic, though I haven't had a chance to see it yet. If you wanted more inclusion of animation and wanted to go outside of America, an outsider pick would have been Triplets of Belleville, as mentioned above, though if this movie had made the top 10, the heads of critics everywhere would have exploded Scanner's style. The Social Network is an all-time classic movie and just feels like everything works. You have a world-class director, Hollywood's premier screenwriter, acting, music, cinematography, all just gelling into something that feels like a parable about the modern world and what happens when damaged people get too much power. I can't say enough good things about it. This is probably the biggest This Is Too Low on the list, and it's still in the top 10. As much as I enjoyed Michael Clayton while watching it, I don't think I've heard anyone say it should have beaten No Country for Old Men or There Will Be Blood for Best Picture. Since The King's Speech came out, everyone has said that about The Social Network. I enjoyed Get Out. I thought it was good for what it was. I've watched all 3 of Peele's movies. I still think Us is the best, but I understand that this is a very important film. More on that later. I still think that this is way, way too high of a ranking, but I understand from a cultural perspective why some people may have put it here, though it is still crazy. I have not seen Eternal Sunshine since it came out when I was in college. I remember disliking it very strongly. I've never had the desire to rewatch it. I was not surprised but disappointed that Gondry's Be Kind Rewind did not make the list. There's no way on God's green earth that it would have made the top 10, but I love this movie and have never understood why so few people seem to agree with me. Sometimes there are just stories that don't have a strong appeal to you, and Eternal Sunshine is one of them for me. Stories about romantic love can work for me, see my feelings on the artist above, but I need to feel invested and charmed by the movie. Maybe it's the manic pixie dream girl aspect of the movie. Her name is Clementine, really. Or maybe it's my lack of understanding and the appeal of Kate Winslet, but the movie just has never done it for me. It's really the same issue I have with Lost in Translation. The appeal escapes me even when I was in my early 20s and ripe for this kind of story. It simply did not work for me. I talked a lot about No Country in my Oscars episode, so check it out there if you want more. Ditto Moonlight. There Will Be Blood. This may be my most controversial statement I make during this podcast. There Will Be Blood is a technical masterpiece of a film. Like No Country for Old Men, The Social Network, and Parasite, it is created at an expert level of craft by a brilliant filmmaker. Plural in the case of the Coen brothers. But unlike those movies, I don't think it ultimately has much to say about the nature of humanity or a universal truth or deeper questions of the universe, and for that, I would not have it in the top 10. I understand why it's here. It's nearly universally loved, but it's never been a movie I have felt the need to return to, even if I recognize that there are images from this movie that have been seared into my brain. To compare to another film, The Rules of the Game is one of the most celebrated films in French cinema history. It somehow manages to be greater than the sum of its parts. There is no real technical wizardry, but through relatively simple yet effective camera shots and brilliant writing, it tells you the story of how the aristocracy and upper class treat people like objects and love like a game. I simply did not have the same level of after-viewing contemplation with There Will Be Blood than I did with this nearly 100-year-old classic. I talked enough about Parasite in my other episodes, so I won't go into it here. Suffice it to say, I'm fine with this pick. I think Parasite is a modern-day fable. A la The Wizard of Oz that will be talked about for a long time to come. It's not my favorite, but I think it's a choice that is hard to argue with. That leaves us with Mulholland Drive. This list was created in the aftermath of David Lynch's passing, so some may argue that it vaulted an already esteemed film higher than it otherwise would have been. Sight and Sound had it at number 8 in 2022 in their latest poll of greatest films of all time, the only movie on that list other than In the Mood for Love that came out this century. Of the top 10 and really every other movie on the list I've seen, Mulholland Drive is the only one that demands some kind of psychoanalytical reading to interpret meaning of the film. My reaction, like almost everyone who finishes watching it for the first time, was, what did I just watch? I don't know if it is fair to call Mulholland Drive the most unique movie on the list, but if you did call it that, I don't think you'd get much argument. Some of its themes, women being abused in the entertainment industry, have had, unfortunately, a lot of staying power. The last takeaway, the list itself. So, what do I think of the list? It was fine. Inoffensive, a bit stuffy. Dark films like Nightcrawler or Prisoners would not have made this list. Something as lighthearted or fun as Sing wouldn't have either. As I alluded to above, things like Wall-E and Up make the list because they are viewed by voters as important. Wall-E is nearly a silent film, and Up has a very memorable first 15 minutes before becoming much more of a paint-by-numbers Pixar movie. But people only remember the first 15 minutes because, for any film, they're gut-wrenching, but the fact that they are the first 15 minutes of a movie aimed at children makes it that much more daring. My guess is that Ratatouille made the list because critics enjoy when they're in the movie, and this one has one of the most memorable, the power of art is transformative arcs that critics seem to eat up with a spoon. Does that mean I hated the list? No. I just think that when we say best, people in the industry, as epitomized by the voters on this list, gravitate towards filmmakers that they know. Takeaway number 1. And anything that is seen as a breakthrough, if that means female-led comedies like Bridesmaids, Japanese animation like Spirited Away, or whatever Everything Everywhere All at Once is. The list lends more towards inclusion, especially in regards to race and gender, and innovation, sometimes at the sacrifice of quality. I think Wall-E is on the list over, say, Toy Story 3 because one of them is seen as being more of a boundary pusher than the other, even if, from an emotional standpoint, the more traditional film achieves what it sets out to do more effectively. There also doesn't seem to be room for technical innovations from blockbuster movies, especially if they're part of a series. Shrek and Avatar are nowhere to be found, even if they did more to change Hollywood than nearly every other film on this list. If the word best implies cultural impact, then Iron Man is the most important movie in the last 25 years because it kickstarted the MCU, which has had the largest box office and cultural impact on American cinema. I don't think that's what voters on this list mean, though. I think most of the voters likely had favorite filmmakers that they flooded the list with and saved a few spots for movies that may have more cultural merit than anything else. Example number 1. I realize that I'm in the minority of movie fans who aren't devotees of Martin Scorsese. I've never seen The Wolf of Wall Street. The movie holds no appeal to me. There may come a day when I feel compelled to watch it, but that day has not yet arrived. As to The Departed, I realize it has a lot of stars in the movie, but it shouldn't be on this list. I talked about this in my earlier episode of the podcast on the Oscars. I think it's a fun movie on first watch, but holds diminishing returns on subsequent viewings. Example number 2. I watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon on my laptop. I bought a VHS tape of this movie, likely around the time it came out. I tried watching the first 15 minutes and stopped. Watching it through to the end for the first time this year, I realized that A, I really despise a slow movie, and B, I understand why this movie is on this list, though it probably shouldn't be. At the time, the wire work was amazing, even if the release of The Matrix predates it by a year, and the choreography of the fight scenes, especially in the dojo, are great and have held up. There's not much else there. As I said, it's a slow movie, and the introduction of a major character halfway through the movie, possibly true to the, I believe it's pronounced wuxia genre, did not endear the movie to me. I'm sure if I had seen it even on VHS on a decent TV, the colors would have popped a little bit more, but that would not have done much to hold my interest, as I thought the movie moved incredibly slow for such a simple story. This movie was a huge cultural event at the time, and in terms of expanding the audience of Asian cinema to Western audiences, it probably did as much, if not more, than any other movie. That being said, as a film on its own merit, I felt underwhelmed. I think overall it's a B+ list. They got it mostly right, but there are relatively few surprises. Any list like this is going to have, by its nature, things that I think should have made it on and things that should be taken off, but overall, while some of the placements are nuts, I think they got more right than they got wrong, which is all I can really ask for from a list pulled by a random assortment of people trying to grade art. Because the list only covered the last 25 years, it was better able to widely recognize movies that have been acknowledged as great. Let's be honest. Hollywood's hit-to-miss ratio isn't that strong, and 100 slots is enough to mostly get things right. Compare this to the Apple Music list I covered in episode number 10, which was hot garbage. Why? Besides the obvious recency bias, they tried to fit the entirety of recorded music into 100 slots, and for such a subjective medium, heavily weighed certain genres, contemporary pop, 90s hip-hop, over pretty much everything else. For whatever individual faults of the New York Times film list, it covers a lot of ground. As I mentioned above, horror, for such a durable and profitable genre, got the shortest shrift, other than Get Out, Let the Right One In, and possibly Black Swan, though I consider this to be more of a psychological thriller than a horror film. It really isn't represented. I would have liked to have seen Hostiles, a rarely watched but powerful Western that starred Christian Bale and Rosamund Pike, and Chicago, which I thought was hands down the best musical of the last 25 years, represent Westerns and musicals respectively. I believe there hasn't been that many great war films or romantic comedies in the last 25 years, but they also had contenders. I mentioned Hacksaw Ridge earlier. Silver Linings Playbook would probably be my pick for best romantic comedy. That or Forgetting Sarah Marshall. If you can overlook these omissions and are cool with the focus on auteurs, I think you're going to at least tolerate the list. If you're really invested in a single genre or wing of cinema, superhero, black cinema, sci-fi, you're likely to have felt the list could have been improved. One of the unmentioned effects of the list being so auteur-heavy is that if there is a movie that is simply a great genre piece, like The Raid or The Expendables, they are less likely to be recognized if they don't have the auteur stamp. I made a joke earlier. These lists are made to drive interaction with fans of the medium. If the list doesn't seem in the least bit controversial, then there is no conversation to be had. It did what it set out to do. There have been a ton of YouTube and podcasts devoted to breaking down the list, sometimes with hosts who have seen upwards of 90 of the movies. This is the kind of interaction that the New York Times was hoping to have. Whether or not it leads to more subscriptions remains to be seen. Only time will tell if the movies on this list make up what is generally referred to as the canon, or if over time, many will slip off and scarcely be remembered 10, 20, or 50 years from today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Elegant Ramblings. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel on YouTube or iTunes. You'll be able to find show notes there. Hope you enjoyed. Bye for now.